Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
This is an incredibly important time. The world is relying on CNN, the United States and the world looking to us for what's going on. Let's accept that responsibility. Thank you in advance. Have a good day and a good weekend.
I mean, George Washington's rolling over in his grave with his farewell address saying, you know, the greatest threat to republics is being interfered with by foreign countries.
But
anyway,
Mr. Vice President, you know,
Dershowitz didn't do the same constitutional law I did.
The problem is, in an impeachment inquiry that the Speaker of the House says is all about bribery, where bribery is the impeachable offense, no witness has used the word bribery to describe President Trump's conduct. None of them. These aren't all of the deposition transcripts. These are just the 10 that have been released. 6 weeks of witness interviews in this impeachment inquiry, hundreds of hours of testimony, thousands of questions asked, thousands of answers given. The number of times that witnesses have been asked any question about whether or not President Trump's conduct constituted bribery before Ambassador Yovanovitch was asked by my colleague, Congressman Stewart, last Thursday, is 0. The number of times witnesses have used the word bribery or bribe to describe President Trump's conduct in the last 6 weeks of this inquiry is 0. In fact, in these 3,500 pages of sworn deposition testimony and just these 10 transcripts released thus far, the word bribery appears in these 3,500 pages exactly 1 time. And ironically, it appears not in a description of President Trump's alleged conduct, it appears in a description of Vice President Biden's alleged conduct. This is important because as early as next week, my Democratic colleagues are going to say, we need to vote on the evidence from this impeachment inquiry, on the impeachment of the president for bribery. And they're going to send a report to the Judiciary Committee, and because there's more Democrats than Republicans, it's going to likely pass. And when that happens, the American people need to be clear that when the Democrats, what they are describing as bribery, not a single witness is describing as bribery. We've heard many times in the course of this proceeding that the facts of the president are not in dispute. But the American people are asking, if the facts are the same, why do the crimes that the president is being accused of keep changing? Why do we go from quid pro quo to extortion, now to bribery? Chairman Nunes told you the answer. The answer is polling. Washington Times asked Americans what would be the most damning accusation, and it didn't come back quid pro quo, it didn't come back extortion, it came back bribery. So this case is all about bribery. Look, it's bad enough that the Democrats have forbidden White House lawyers from participating in this proceeding. It's hard enough to defend yourself without your lawyers present. But what's even worse is trying to defend yourself against an accusation that keeps changing in the middle of the proceeding. If Democrats accuse the president of a high crime or impeachable offense, he at least ought to know which one it is. And when Speaker Pelosi says this is all about bribery, she's promised us evidence of bribery that would be compelling and overwhelming, and instead, it's invisible. I yield back.
Former Vice President Joe Biden locked in a tight race with Senator Bernie Sanders and others ahead of Monday's Iowa caucuses. Mr. Vice President, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard the president there. Impeachment.
Glad to be here, George.
He said impeachment light, they're going to crush you in November.
Well, I'm glad he's acknowledged it's going to be me. He's so worried about me, he got himself in this mix to begin with. Look, I find this defense absolutely astounding. Yeah, he did it, but it doesn't matter. I mean, George Washington's rolling over in his grave with his farewell address saying, you know, the greatest threat to republics is being interfered with by foreign countries.
But
Anyway,
Mr. Vice President, as you know,
Dershowitz didn't do the same constitutional law I did.
Let's talk about the Constitution a
Sorry.
little bit, because your former colleague Lamar Alexander criticized last night when he made his announcement a wholly partisan impeachment, and that echoed your position during the Clinton impeachment. I want to show our viewers.
It would have been wrong for Richard Nixon to have been removed from office based upon a purely partisan vote. No president should be removed from office merely because one party enjoys a commanding lead in either house of Congress.
If a partisan impeachment was wrong in 1974, wrong in 1998, why isn't it wrong now?
Because it's not a partisan impeachment. He violated the Constitution.
Only
Period.
Democrats voted for it in the House and one independent.
Well, that doesn't mean that the facts, the underlying facts, George, whether the Constitution's been violated. That's the issue. That's the issue. Was the Constitution violated?
Even if it's a party line vote.
Period. Even if it's party line vote, it just goes, it reflects on those who know, in fact, in their heart and their head, that in fact it's a violation of the Constitution to do what he did, and in fact vote no. That's party line vote, but that doesn't make it right. And a party line vote that is based upon something that doesn't relate to a constitutional violation is a different thing.
Let's talk.
Yield to Mr. Ratcliffe.
Ambassador Sondland, I'm going to try and quickly move to summarize all of your direct communications with President Trump as it relates to this inquiry, and of course you can correct me if I get it wrong. On May 23rd, you had a group meeting that included what you called a vanilla request about ending corruption involving Ukrainian oligarchs, correct?
Correct.
On July 25th, you called President Trump to say you were on your way to Ukraine, but nothing of substance occurred on that call, correct?
Correct.
On July 26th, you had a 5-minute call at a restaurant that you didn't originally remember because it, according to your statement this morning, quote, did not strike me as significant at the time, end quote, but once refreshed, recalled that the primary purpose was a rapper named A$AP Rocky, correct?
Correct.
And on September 9th, and most importantly, reading from your deposition, you called President Trump to ask him, what do you want from Ukraine? He responded, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. I want him to do what he ran on. And what he ran on was fighting corruption, correct?
Correct.
And then lastly, on October 2nd, in a random in-person meeting that you had at an event for the Finnish president, you ran into President Trump and advised him that you'd been called to testify before Congress, and he said to you, good, go tell the truth.
That's correct.
All right, and that is the entirety of your recollection of your direct communications with President Trump about these matters.
I may have had another call or meeting or two. I wish, Mr. Ratcliffe, I had the record.
I understand, but this is what you recall.
This is what I recall.
Okay, so stop me if there's anything sinister or nefarious in any of this. A vanilla request about corruption, a call to say I'm on my way to Ukraine, a 5-minute call you didn't remember as significant, but its primary purpose was to discuss a rapper, a call that you made where the president said, I want nothing, I want no quid pro quo, I want Zelensky to do the right thing, I want him to do what he ran on, and him telling you to go tell Congress the truth. Anything sinister or nefarious about any of that?
Not the way you present it.
Okay, and that is the truth as you've presented it, correct?
Correct.
All right, why that's important, Ambassador Sondland, is because none of that is hearsay. None of that is speculation. None of that is opinion. That is direct evidence. And ultimately, that is what, if this proceeds to the Senate, they're going to care about. Unlike this proceeding, which has been based on largely speculation and presumption and opinion, this is direct testimony and direct evidence. And to that point, none of that included evidence about the Bidens, and none of that included evidence about military assistance, because President Trump never mentioned either of those to you, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So going back to the July 26th call, because it's going to be a spectacle tomorrow, you didn't remember it because it didn't strike you as significant at the time. Is it fair to say that if the President of the United States was asking you to do or say something improper or unlawful, that would have been significant to you?
Yes.
All right. And if that call was part of a bribery or extortion scheme that you were part of, as Democrats have alleged, you'd remember that as significant, wouldn't you?
I was not a part, and I would have remembered.
I understand that, and I agree with you. Let's turn to the quid pro quo, because it's been reported in the papers that this was blockbuster testimony today about quid pro quo and new evidence. To be fair to you, Ambassador Sondland, according to your statement today, as you say on page 14, as you testified previously, this was your opinion that there was a quid pro quo, correct?
The 2016 Burisma and the 2016 election and Burisma in return for the White House meeting. That's
Right.
correct.
So you've shared that before. To that point, to be clear again, on the part of it that relates to military assistance, though, you don't have any direct evidence from President Trump about that part of it. That's your 2+2 part of the equation, right? The presumption, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you understand also that others disagreed. Yesterday we heard from Mr. Morrison, Ambassador Volker. They testified that they didn't see a quid pro quo. Do you understand that?
I understand that. That's what they said.
Okay. That reasonable people could look at all of this and come to different conclusions. Correct?
Correct.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Gates.
The will of the American people also elected Donald Trump to be the president of the United States in the 2016 election, and there's one party that can't seem to get over it. Now, we understand the fact that in 2018 you took the House of Representatives, and we haven't spent our time during your tenure in power trying to remove the Speaker of the House, trying to delegitimize your ability to govern. Frankly, we'd love to govern with you. We'd love to pass USMCA. We'd love to put out a helping hand to our seniors and lower prescription drug prices. It's the will of the people you ignore when you continue down this terrible road of impeachment. Professor Gerhardt, you gave money to Barack Obama, right?
My family did, yes.
4 times?
That sounds about right. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a series of unanimous consent requests relating to Professor Feldman's work. The first, Noah Feldman, Trump's wiretap tweets raise risk of impeachment.
The gentleman will suspend.
My time.
We'll take that time off. Has the gentleman submitted? Have we seen those? That material?
We can provide it to you, as is typical for unanimous.
And we'll consider the unanimous consent request later after we review
Very
the
well.
material.
Very well. Thank you.
The gentleman may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feldman wrote articles entitled, "Trump's Wiretap Tweets Raise Risk of Impeachment." He then wrote, "Mar-a-Lago ad belongs in impeachment file." And then Mr. Jake Flanagan wrote in Quartz, a Harvard law professor thinks Trump could be impeached over fake news accusations. My question, Professor Feldman, is since you seem to believe that the basis for impeachment is even broader than the basis that my Democrat colleagues have laid forward, do you believe you're outside of the political mainstream on the question of impeachment?
I believe that impeachment is warranted whenever the president abuses his power for personal benefit or to corrupt the democratic process.
Did you write an article entitled "It's Hard to Take Impeachment Seriously Now"?
Yes, I did write that article.
And in that article, did you write, hold on, I'm limited on time, sir.
I wrote
did you write, since the 2018 midterm election, House Democrats have made it painfully clear that discussing impeachment is primarily or even exclusively a tool to weaken President Trump's chances in 2020. Did you write those words?
Until this call in July 25th, I was an impeachment skeptic. The
Very
call
well.
changed my mind, sir, and for
Thank
good
you.
reason.
I appreciate your testimony. Professor Carlin, you gave $2,000, or you gave $1,000 to Elizabeth Warren, right?
I believe so.
You gave $1,200 to Barack Obama?
I have no reason to question that.
And you gave $2,000 to Hillary Clinton?
That's correct.
Why so much more for Hillary than the other two?
Because I've been giving a lot of money to charity recently because of all of the poor people in the United States.
Well, those aren't the only folks you've been given to. Now, have you ever been on a podcast called Versus Trump?
I think I was on a live panel that the people who ran the podcast called Versus Trump.
On that, do you remember saying the following? Liberals tend to cluster more. Conservatives, especially very conservative people, tend to spread out more. Perhaps because they don't even want to be around themselves. Did you say that?
Yes, I did.
Do you understand how that reflects contempt on people who are conservative?
No, what I was talking about there was the natural tendency, if you put the quote in context, the natural tendency of a compactness requirement to favor a party whose voters are more spread out.
Well,
and I do not have contempt
hold on.
for conservatives.
I'm very limited on time, Professor. And so I just have to say, when you talk about how liberals want to be around each other and cluster, and conservatives don't want to be around each other, and so they have to spread out, it makes people, you may not see this from, like the ivory towers of your law school, but it makes actual people in this country feel like, excuse me, you don't get to interrupt me on this time. Now, let me also suggest that when you invoke the president's son's name here, when you try to make a little joke out of referencing Barron Trump, that does not lend credibility to your argument. It makes you look mean. It makes you look like you're attacking someone's family, the minor child of the President of the United States. So let's see if we can get into the facts. To all of the witnesses, if you have personal knowledge of a single material fact in the Schiff report, please raise your hand. And let the record reflect no personal knowledge of a single fact. And you know what? That continues on the tradition that we saw from Adam Schiff, where Ambassador Taylor could not identify an impeachable offense. Mr. Kent never met with the president. Fiona Hill never heard the president reference anything regarding military aid. Mr. Hale was unaware of any nefarious activity with aid. Colonel Vindman even rejected the new Democrat talking point that bribery was invoked here. Ambassador Volker denied that there was a quid pro quo, and Mr. Morrison said there was nothing wrong on the call. The only direct evidence came from Gordon Sondland, who spoke to the President of the United States, and the President said, "I want nothing, no quid pro quo." And you know what? If wiretapping a political opponent's an impeachable offense, I look forward to reading that Inspector General's report, because maybe it's a different president we should be impeaching.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment strikes the reference to Joe Biden as the center of the proposed investigation and replaces it with the true topic of the investigation, Burisma and Hunter Biden. An essential element of the Democrats' case on abuse of power is that the Bidens did nothing wrong. It can only be an abuse of power and not a correct use of power if the president was pursuing something under which there was no reasonable basis to ask a question about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Hunter Biden and Burisma, well, that's an interesting story. And I think just about every American knows there's something up with that. $86,000 a month, no experience, working for some foreign government while your dad's the vice president of the United States. Is there anyone who believes this is okay? I know we got a few of my Democrat colleagues maybe run for president or might run for president one day. Would you let your vice president have their son or daughter or family member out moonlighting for some foreign company? Maybe I'll use language familiar to the former vice president. Come on, man. This looks dirty as it is. Hunter Biden was making more than 5 times more than a board member for ExxonMobil. I've heard of that company. And so I went to read up on Hunter Biden, learn a little more about him, and I found this very extensive profile in the New Yorker. And here's what it says. Hunter said that at that point, he had not slept for several days. Driving east on Interstate 10 just beyond Palm Springs, he lost control of his car, which jumped the median and skidded to a stop on the shoulder of the westbound side. He called Hertz, which came to collect the damaged car and gave him a second rental. The Hertz rental officer told me he found a crack pipe in the car and on one of the consoles a line of white powder residue. Beau Biden's Attorney General badge was on the dashboard. Hertz called the Prescott Police Department, and officers filed a narcotics offense report listing items seized in the car, including a plastic bag containing white powdery substance, a Secret Service business card, credit cards, and Hunter Biden's driver's license. That is what we would call evidence. And I don't want to make light of anybody's substance abuse issues. I know the president's working real hard to solve those throughout the country, but it's a little hard to believe that Burisma hired Hunter Biden to resolve their international disputes when he could not resolve his own dispute with Hertz rental car over leaving cocaine and a crack pipe in the car. It continues. Hunter stayed in Los Angeles for about a week. He said that he needed to get away and forget sooner after his arrival in L.A. He said he asked a homeless man in Pershing Square where he could buy crack. Hunter said that the man took him to a nearby homeless encampment where a narrow passageway between tents, someone put a gun to his head before realizing that he was the buyer. He returned to buy more crack a few times that week. Again, not saying, not casting any judgment on any challenges someone goes through in their personal life, but it is just hard to believe that this was the guy wandering through homeless encampments buying crack that was worth $86,000 a month to Burisma Holding. And that might be one of the reasons why when ABC asked Hunter Biden, hey, you think you would have gotten this job in the absence of your dad being the vice president? Well, he said, probably not. And then I looked to the record evidence, and I looked at the testimony of Mr. Kent. Mr. Kent was one of the witnesses they called on the first day. He said Burisma was so dirty that our own embassy had to pull out of a joint sponsorship with them. When Ambassador Yovanovitch was being prepped for her Senate confirmation, the Obama administration was so worried about the corruption around Burisma and Hunter Biden that they held special prep moments to try to get ready for the inevitable questions about this obvious corruption that the president asked about. Mr. Kent, again, one of their witnesses from the first day, also gave testimony that that the head of Burisma had stolen $23 million in the U.S. and the U.K., and that he paid a bribe to get off the hook. So again, it's not as if Burisma is pulling out new plays. Their playbook is to do dirty stuff and then go and pay bribes and hire the people necessary to make those problems go away. This is why the minority hearing issue is so important, by the way. You wonder why Republicans are so angry that we didn't have a hearing to put on our own witnesses and own evidence. And you may wonder why, well, if they feel so good about their case, why did they block our ability to put in evidence?